Ava's flawlessly polished hand clamped down on my arm with just enough force to be uncomfortable as she guided me toward her boss at my son's wedding reception. With that syrupy tone she reserved for moments when she wanted something, she announced, "Mr. Blake, I'd like you to meet my new mother-in-law. This is Eleanor. She is, at the moment, between jobs." The hesitation before those words stretched out, hanging in the air like the stale smoke from a cheap cigar. But it was not that pause that made my blood pressure surge. The real blow came with the next comment, delivered through a smile sharp enough to slice glass. "In fact, she has been unemployed for quite some time. Honestly, a bit of a failure." If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Let me step back for a moment and explain how I ended up in a glittering hotel ballroom, dressed in my best outfit, listening to my new daughter-in-law label me a loser to her boss. It all began 6 months earlier when Noah, my only child, announced his engagement to Ava Sinclair. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs then, but love makes fools of even the most careful among us, especially when that love is for our children. Noah first met Ava at an upscale corporate function. She worked for Blake & Associates, a mid-sized marketing firm downtown, where she liked to broadcast her role as an account manager with a corner office. She made sure every person within earshot knew of her achievements, particularly during those strained family dinners when she would take work calls right at the table. "So sorry," she would murmur, not sounding sorry in the least, "but when you're climbing the corporate ladder, you can't afford to miss opportunities." From the first day, planning the wedding felt like an ordeal. Ava insisted on controlling every detail: the flowers, the music, the guest list, and especially my place in the ceremony. I overheard her telling Noah, loud enough for me to catch every word, that perhaps it would be best if Eleanor kept a very low profile, since, in her opinion, she doesn't really understand professional networking. Professional networking, as though the 30 years I had spent cultivating relationships in my own field counted for nothing. Still, I kept my silence because Noah was happy. My son glowed whenever he looked at her, and if she brought him joy, then I would find a way to swallow my pride. What I had not expected was that she would seize the largest gathering of our family's life to attempt to humiliate me in public. Standing there in that ballroom, I watched her boss's expression shift as he digested her words, and in that instant I realized something. This was not the end. This was only the beginning of the game. Mr. Blake's eyebrows shot upward so fast they nearly disappeared into his thinning hairline. He was a wiry man in his 50s, the kind who probably counted every calorie and spent his weekends running marathons. His handshake was firm but fleeting, as though he were already calculating how quickly he could step away. "Unemployed," he repeated, glancing between Ava and me. "I understand." I could almost hear Ava's triumphant celebration in her head. She thought she had succeeded in painting me as the family disgrace, believing it would make her shine brighter by comparison. What she never noticed was that I had been observing her all night, cataloging each subtle jab and every carefully masked insult. And what she could not possibly know was the truth about who I really was. So I leaned in with my most grandmotherly smile and said, "Well, I suppose that is one way of looking at it." Her grip on my arm tightened, urging me to fade into the background now that she had made her point. But I had no intention of vanishing just yet. Turning politely to her boss, I asked, "Tell me, Mr. Blake, how are you finding the challenges in your industry these days?" His expression brightened at once, grateful for a genuine question. "Oh, you know how it goes," he said. "The competition is intense. With social media, everyone suddenly believes they are a marketing expert. We have to prove our worth to clients again and again. That must be especially difficult when you are up against larger firms," I remarked thoughtfully. "Companies with stronger connections and far greater resources." Ava's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing as though she couldn't fathom how an unemployed mother-in-law would know anything about competitive markets. Mr. Blake, however, nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. There's one company in particular, Carter Enterprises. They have been dominating for years. A massive client list and excellent reputation. Their CEO is considered a genius, though very little is known about her personally. She is an extremely private person." The irony was so rich I nearly laughed aloud. Instead, I kept my composure, offered a small smile and replied, "How fascinating." Ava's eyes darted between us, confusion spreading as she struggled to understand how her supposed loser mother-in-law was holding her own in a professional conversation with her boss. The band struck up at last, and Noah whisked Ava onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. From my table, I sipped a champagne that had gone flat more than 20 minutes earlier. They looked flawless together. Him in his sharp black tuxedo, her in a gown that likely cost more than some people's cars. But perfection often hides fractures, and I was beginning to notice them everywhere. "She is lovely," said Mrs. Green, the elderly woman seated beside me. She had once been Ava's kindergarten teacher, though Ava had barely acknowledged her while greeting the guests. "Although I must admit, she has changed quite a lot since she was 5 years old." "People do grow up," I answered with careful diplomacy. "Though sometimes I think people grow into the same person they always were, just with a more sophisticated vocabulary." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Green murmured, leaning in as her voice softened. "It is just back then she was such a generous child, always making sure the others had enough crayons, always standing up for the shy ones. I often wonder what becomes of that kindness when we get older." I looked across the room at Ava, who was laughing at something Noah had whispered in her ear. Her face lit with joy. For a brief moment she looked almost genuinely happy, and in her expression I could almost catch a glimpse of the 5-year-old who once shared her crayons. But as soon as the song ended, her eyes swept the room, scanning for new opportunities, most likely searching for more influential people to impress at her own wedding reception. That was when I noticed her walking directly toward the Whitakers' table. Robert Whitaker happened to own the largest construction company in the entire state, while his wife Margaret served on nearly half of the town's most important charity boards. Ava had done her homework. She knew exactly who mattered in that ballroom and treated the reception as if it were a corporate conference. I excused myself politely from Mrs. Green and claimed I needed to freshen up. Instead of heading to the powder room, I slipped onto the terrace outside. The September evening was perfect, cool enough that I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, yet warm enough to feel comfortable. I needed space to think, to process the insult I had just endured, and to decide how to move forward. That was when I caught the sound of voices coming from around the corner. It was Ava speaking into her phone. "No, Mom, it went perfectly. I made sure Mr. Blake understands that I am not like these small-town people, especially the mother-in-law. You should have seen his expression when I told him about her." There was a pause, then her laughter. "Trust me, after tonight, he will recognize me as the real professional in this family." I lingered on that terrace for another 10 minutes, listening as Ava placed 2 more calls. The first was to someone she addressed as Babe, which was quite the discovery given she had just married my son. The second was to her sister, where she retold the story of her supposed triumph, each version growing more exaggerated. I had gone from unemployed to practically unemployable, from being overlooked to being labeled outright pathetic. The thing about overhearing conversations is that it doesn't just change how you see others, it also alters how you see yourself. Standing in the shadows, listening to my son's new bride dismantle me for sport, I realized that for months I had been playing a part. The agreeable mother-in-law, the woman who kept the peace, the gracious one who stepped aside for the younger generation. But that woman was nothing more than a performance, and performances only work as long as everyone agrees to believe them. By the time I returned to the reception, the cake had been cut and the crowd was beginning to thin. Older relatives excused themselves with mentions of long drives home or early bedtimes. I spotted Noah at the bar, his tie loosened, looking happily exhausted. "Mom, there you are. I was searching for you. Ava wanted to introduce you to a few more of her colleagues." "How thoughtful of her," I said, taking the glass of wine he handed me, though the last thing I wanted was another round of introductions. "I believe I've met enough of her co-workers for tonight." Noah studied me closely, his brow furrowing. "Is everything all right? You seem different." He had always been perceptive even as a boy. "Just a bit tired, sweetheart," I answered, patting his cheek. "It has been a big day. The wedding was beautiful and Ava looked stunning." "She really did, didn't she?" His whole face lit up the way it always did whenever he mentioned her. "I'm so glad the 2 of you are getting along. That means the world to me." Getting along. If only he knew the words his bride had spoken about me less than an hour earlier. But this was his wedding day, and I would not be the one to tarnish it. Of course we are. I lied smoothly. She's part of the family now. And in that moment the answer became clear. Ava was officially part of the family, which meant she was my responsibility, and I had always taken my responsibilities with the utmost seriousness. The following Monday morning, I sat in my home office with a fresh cup of coffee and a legal pad brimming with notes. Ava had made one critical mistake during her little act at the reception. She had assumed I was nothing more than what I appeared to be, a retired woman with no professional connections. But assumptions, as I had learned during more than 3 decades in business, can be dangerous. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew well. Patricia, it's Eleanor Carter. I hope you enjoyed your weekend. Yes, the wedding was lovely, thank you for asking. Now listen carefully. I need you to set up a meeting with the Blake account team for this afternoon. And Patricia, make sure everyone understands this is confidential until I give the word. Patricia Martinez had been my executive assistant for 12 years, and she knew exactly what that tone meant. Someone was about to have a very bad day, and I was looking forward to every minute of it. By Tuesday, I already had a complete file on Ava Sinclair Carter. Her work history, her college records, her credit report, and even social media posts reaching back 5 years were all neatly compiled. Information has always been power, and I never made a move without being prepared. The details were illuminating. Ava had been with Blake & Associates for 3 years, beginning as a junior account coordinator before moving up to account manager. Her reviews were respectable but far from extraordinary. She was competent, dependable, and ambitious, the sort of employee who did solid work but was unlikely to set the world ablaze. Far more interesting were her online activities. Instagram pictures from extravagant restaurants she labeled as client dinners, Facebook check-ins at luxury hotels during supposed business trips, and LinkedIn updates about networking events that looked suspiciously like personal vacations. The real treasure turned out to be her expense reports. Patricia's team had combed through every detail with precision, and what they uncovered was 3 full years of questionable charges, creative labeling of business expenses, and receipts that never quite matched up. Nothing outright criminal, but certainly the kind of financial sloppiness that reflected poorly on someone in her position. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Ava had made the oldest mistake in the book. She underestimated her opponent. She saw a gray-haired woman in a conservative dress and assumed she was dealing with a harmless grandmother. She was right about the grandmother part, but she had never stopped to consider whose grandmother I was. By Wednesday, my mind was made up. I called Patricia and instructed her to arrange a meeting with Mr. Blake for Thursday afternoon. Tell him it concerns the future of his firm's relationship with Carter Enterprises. And Patricia, I added, be sure that Ava Sinclair, Ava Carter now, is present as well. Thursday arrived under gray skies, with a light drizzle that made the whole city feel sluggish. But I was up before dawn, preparing as carefully as a general before a decisive battle. I selected my navy blue power suit, the one I had worn to my very first board meeting more than 25 years ago, and paired it with the pearl necklace Noah's father had given me for our 10th anniversary. The look was professional, commanding, and left no doubt about who was in control. The offices of Blake & Associates were exactly what I had expected. Glass walls, chrome fixtures, and motivational posters preaching synergy and innovation. At the front desk, the receptionist, a neatly groomed young man with a nervous smile, announced my arrival into his headset with the reverence of someone speaking to royalty. Miss Carter is here for her appointment with Mr. Blake. Then he turned to me with a bright grin. He'll be right with you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Coffee black, I replied, settling into one of the uncomfortable modern chairs in the waiting area. From where I sat, I had a clear view of the office bullpen. Ava was at her desk, typing briskly, dressed in a sharp red blazer with her hair pinned back in a style that must have taken at least an hour to achieve. She was in full corporate warrior mode, completely unaware of my presence. Perfect. I wanted the shock to hit her at just the right moment. At precisely 2 o'clock, Mr. Blake appeared, flanked by 2 executives I didn't recognize, and trailing behind them Ava. The instant her eyes landed on me, she froze, her face shifting rapidly from confusion to recognition and finally to something close to panic. Mrs. Carter, Mr. Blake greeted warmly, extending his hand. Thank you so much for coming in. When your assistant called, We were thrilled at the chance to explore a partnership with Carter Enterprises. Ava had gone pale, staring at me as though I had walked straight through a wall. "The pleasure is mine," I said graciously as I shook his hand. "Though I should clarify, it is Miss Carter. And before we begin, there is an urgent matter involving one of your employees that I believe requires immediate discussion." The conference room fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop onto the polished mahogany table. Ava had turned from pale to nearly green, and for a moment I wondered if she might actually faint. Mr. Blake glanced between us with the tense look of a man realizing too late that he had wandered into dangerous territory. I apologize," he began carefully, "but I think there may be some misunderstanding. This is Ava Carter, one of our account managers. She was just married this past weekend. And you are?" "I am Eleanor Carter," I said smoothly, "Ava's new mother-in-law and the chief executive officer of Carter Enterprises." I paused, letting the words settle in the air for 3 long seconds before continuing. "The same Carter Enterprises that your firm has been pursuing as a client for the past 18 months. Ava let out a sound caught between a gasp and a whimper. The 2 other executives, clearly brought along to help pitch to Carter Enterprises, stared at me as though I had just announced I was an alien. "But at the wedding," Mr. Blake stammered, "Ava told us you were unemployed. She called you a loser," I finished helpfully. "Yes, I remember, along with several other flattering descriptions. All of them delivered with great enthusiasm in front of your colleagues and my entire family." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, laying it neatly on the table. "Which brings me to the reason I am here today." Ava finally found her voice, though it shook. "Eleanor, I can explain. It was the wedding nerves, I didn't mean." "Oh, but you did mean it," I said calmly. "You meant it enough to call your mother afterward and brag about putting me in my place. Then you called your sister. Then, most interestingly, someone you addressed as babe. A curious choice of words considering you had just married my son." The color drained from Mr. Blake's face. He was beginning to understand this was no longer a matter of hurt feelings. It was about his company's future, with one of its most valuable potential clients. "Perhaps," I continued, opening the folder and spreading its contents across the conference table, "before we discuss the business needs of Carter Enterprises, we should review Ava's performance as an employee." The documents made a crisp, satisfying sound as I spread them neatly across the polished table. Expense reports, receipts, performance evaluations, and screenshots from social media. 3 full years of Ava's professional record laid bare in front of her employer. Mr. Blake's eyes widened as he skimmed the evidence. "These are internal company files. How did you do this kind of due diligence?" I folded my hands calmly. When someone makes a spectacle of humiliating me in public, I prefer to learn exactly who I am dealing with. And what I discovered proved to be very enlightening. I pointed to one sheet in particular. "Take this restaurant bill from last March. Ava logged it as a client dinner. Yet, according to the reservation records, it was actually her birthday celebration, with 8 of her college friends." Ava's hands trembled. That has to be some kind of mistake. "Or consider this hotel stay in Miami last June," I continued smoothly, ignoring her protests. "She filed it under a business conference, but her Instagram posts from the very same weekend paint a different story. Photographs of her lounging by the pool in a bikini do not exactly suggest hours of workshops and seminars." One of the other executives, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, leaned forward. "Are you implying that Ava has been falsifying expense reports?" "I am not implying anything," I replied evenly. "I am presenting facts and leaving the conclusions to you." I slid another page forward. "Here is Ava's LinkedIn profile from last week. Note how she describes herself as senior management and a key decision maker at Blake & Associates. An interesting case of title inflation, wouldn't you agree, for someone whose actual position is account manager?" Mr. Blake was beginning to perspire. It was obvious he had never taken a close look at Ava's online activity, and the picture forming before him was far from flattering. "Now then," I said, snapping the folder shut, "let us move on to the business of Carter Enterprises. We are searching for a marketing partner to lead our expansion into the southeastern market. The projected value of this contract is approximately $12 million spread over 3 years. The room went utterly still. $12 million was likely more than Blake and Associates earned in total annual revenue. $12 million, Mr. Blake repeated faintly, sounding like a man who had just been handed both a golden opportunity and a loaded gun. Of course, I continued lightly, Carter Enterprises adheres to the strictest standards of ethics. We have learned that companies with questionable practices inside their walls tend to carry those same flaws into their client work. And that, I said, gesturing toward the pile of documents, is something we simply cannot afford. Suddenly, Ava pushed her chair back so abruptly that it screeched against the floor. This is absurd. You cannot do this to me just because of some silly misunderstanding at a wedding. I regarded her with cool detachment, the way one might look at something unpleasant on the bottom of a shoe. Some silly misunderstanding? Ava, you humiliated me at my son's wedding, then immediately bragged about it to multiple people. You have exaggerated your job title, manipulated your expense reports, and seem to be maintaining relationships your husband might find troubling. Her face snapped toward me in fury. What relationships? The words were out before she seemed to realize the trap she had sprung. The one you referred to as babe during your call after the wedding, I said mildly. The very same person you told about how you had put your new mother-in-law in her place. I imagine Noah would be very interested in that conversation. Mr. Blake cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should take a short recess, give everyone a chance to process. Actually, I said, rising to my feet and gathering the documents back into their folder, I believe we are finished. Mr. Blake, you have some difficult decisions ahead. About your employee, and about your firm's future. I will be in touch next week to let you know whether Carter Enterprises intends to move forward. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Ava, do remember to update your LinkedIn profile. I suspect your new job description is about to become much more realistic. That evening at 7:30, while I was enjoying a glass of wine on my back patio, my phone rang. Noah's name lit up the screen, and even before I answered, I could feel the panic radiating from the call. Mom, what on earth did you do? He demanded the moment I picked up. I took a slow sip of wine and watched a bright red cardinal land on my bird feeder. Hello, darling. How was your first day back from the honeymoon? Don't hello darling me. Ava came home in tears. She says you got her fired. I did not get anyone fired, I said truthfully. I attended a business meeting with her employer. A business meeting? His voice rose. Where you showed up as the CEO of some company and blindsided her? Carter Enterprises is not some company, Noah. It is the company I have been running for the last 15 years. The company that paid for your college education and your law school tuition. The company that purchased your first house and your first car. My tone was measured, but I could feel the anger simmering beneath. The company your wife never once bothered to ask me about. There was silence on the line. Then very softly, you are the CEO of Carter Enterprises? I have been since your father passed away, I explained gently. I kept his name on the door because it was his dream as much as mine. But yes, I have been running it all along. But you never told me. You never even mentioned work. Because you never asked, I said quietly. And because I wanted you to achieve success on your own merit, not because others knew you as my son. Something your wife might have learned from, had she thought before publicly labeling me a loser. Another silence stretched out long and heavy until Noah finally said. She told me what she said at the wedding. She feels awful about it. I am sure she does now that she knows who I am. Mom, please. She made a mistake, but she is my wife. Can't we find some way to fix this? That was the question I had been dreading. Because the truth was, fixing this would be easy. One phone call, and I could smooth over Ava's expense reports, her inflated job titles, and her questionable conduct. I could hand Blake and Associates the $12 million contract and pretend none of this ever occurred. But doing that would teach Ava nothing, and worse, it would leave my son vulnerable to a woman who had shown her true colors. Noah, I said carefully, what exactly did Ava tell you about why she lost her job? The silence on the line stretched so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Noah's voice came back to me, smaller and more hesitant than before. She said you were vindictive, that you couldn't handle a little joke at the wedding, so you used your business connections to ruin her career. I closed my eyes and counted slowly to 10. Ava had learned absolutely nothing from what had happened. Even when faced with the fallout of her own behavior, she still managed to cast herself as the victim. And what do you think about that explanation? I asked. There was a pause long enough for me to picture him weighing every word. I think there is probably more to the story. There is, I confirmed. Your wife has been falsifying expense reports for 3 years. She has been exaggerating her job title on professional networks. And she has been maintaining what appears to be a romantic relationship with someone she calls Babe. Someone she called immediately after our wedding to brag about how she had handled me. The sound Noah made was caught between a gasp and a groan. That can't be true. I have documentation, sweetheart. Phone records, social media posts, and financial reports. I did not create evidence, I simply collected what was already there. Then why didn't you tell me all of this before your meeting with her boss? That was the one question I had hoped he would not ask, because the answer revealed something about me I wasn't proud of. Because I wanted to give her the chance to come clean on her own. I wanted to see if she would take responsibility for her choices, or if she would continue to lie and manipulate. And she chose to lie. She did, he admitted quietly. Even when faced with proof, she had blamed everyone else but herself. I could hear Ava's voice in the background, sharp, defensive, demanding. Noah must have covered the phone, but fragments of their argument still reached me. Her insisting I was cruel and vindictive, him pressing her about the expense reports and the phone calls, her countering that everything was misunderstood or taken out of context. When Noah came back on the line, his voice sounded different, older, wearier. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need your absolute honesty. Always, I said. Did you plan this? The entire thing? Letting her humiliate you at the wedding, digging into her background, arranging that meeting? Was this all orchestrated? I looked out across my garden where the evening light was casting everything in gold. 30 years of building a company had taught me that not every battle is won through direct confrontation. Some are won through patience, preparation, and timing. I didn't plan for your wife to call me a loser at your wedding, Noah. But once she did, yes, I planned my response very carefully. And now she has lost her job, and Blake and Associates may lose the contract. I paused, then allowed myself a small smile. Actually, I called Mr. Blake this afternoon. Carter Enterprises will be awarding the contract to his firm. They will get the $12 million, and they will use that revenue to bring on employees with stronger ethics. As for Ava, that is between her and her former employer. Though I understand she will receive a reference letter that truthfully reflects her 3 years of service. Noah was quiet for so long that my heart began to ache for him. When he finally spoke, his words were barely more than a whisper. I married someone I don't really know, didn't I? My chest tightened. You married the person you believed you knew. Sometimes that is the same thing and sometimes it isn't. What matters now is what you choose to do with the truth you have been given. After we ended the call, I stayed outside on the patio until the stars filled the sky. Ava would land on her feet, people like her always did. She would find another job, probably at a firm less diligent about background checks. Maybe she would even learn something from this ordeal, though I doubted it. But Noah would be all right. He was stronger and sharper than she had ever given him credit for, and now he had the information he needed to make his own decisions about his marriage and his future. As for me, I had learned something as well. After 3 decades of being diplomatic and endlessly accommodating, I realized that sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is refuse to be treated like a doormat, even if that means forcing your own child to confront hard truths about the person they married. Especially then. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your own story in the comments. Your voice truly matters.